The Congo-Brazzaville government has denied claims of a coup attempt. On Sunday, rumors started circulating that there were attempts to oust the President Denis Sassou Nguesso. Nguesso currently attending the United Nations General Assembly, much like other presidents right now, including our very own. Well, let's discuss these developments then, and we're joined by the Director for Geneva Centre for Africa Security and Strategic Studies, David Otto, and Africa analyst, Koffi Kouakou. Gentlemen, to both of you, thank you very much for your time. Let me begin with you, David. So what story should we believe coming out of Congo-Brazzaville? Was there a coup, or is it a coup attempt? Did it fail? What exactly is going on there?
I think we're not very clear at this point in time. The official proclamation from the spokesperson of the Congo-Brazzaville government is that there is no military coup d'etat. But this is very normal. Each government that is a potential victim of a military coup would always deny that there is an attempt, especially if the situation is not quite clear. Usually it takes between 12 to 24 hours, for a military coup, depending on the dynamics, within the particular setting or whoever is carrying out the coup. So it takes time for them to consolidate and then declare themselves as beneficiaries of that coup d'etat. Of course, in this case, we are not very sure if that is the case, if this is still something which is still unraveling behind closed doors. But we can only take the official position from the government, which of course could be the potential victim of a coup attempt. At this point in time, we know that the government has said there is no coup attempt. The president is out of the country, as we know, attending the United Nations General Assembly. But there has been talks about his longevity in power, being associated to perhaps what we saw in the case of Gabon, where President Ali Bongo was overthrown by his presidential guard. On some of the reasons being that he has been, or the Bongo family has been in power since the independence of that country. Of course, we also know that this is a replacement of one family with another member of that same family. But in the case of Congo-Brazzaville, we're still watching to see what comes next. But we do hope that this is not another coup in that part of the continent.
Koffi, let's come to you. If indeed there was a coup attempt in Congo-Brazzaville, we understand the president is in the United States at the UN. Do you anticipate any kind of action from President Sassou Nguesso? What kind of action might be taken?
Well, first, I want to greet you and greet your audience. I would agree fully with David. It is clear that we're not quite sure what's happening. But to answer your question, President Sassou Nguesso is a very tough and very rough president, and he's really been in power for many years, not because he's a sissy, but because he really knows how to use power. So if there's such a thing, he will really clean up very quickly. If he still has power, of course, he'll clean up his cabinets and reorganize everything that helps him to remain in power. In fact, one thing that's very important is that his daughter was the wife of Bongo Senior. So there is a relationship between Gabon, family relationship between Gabon, and of course Congo-Brazzaville. So the dynastic rule still plays out. There might be some problems in finding out what's going on. But for me, what is important is if there were really a coup, a serious coup, by now we would have found out. However, I would agree with David. It's not quite clear, so we need to keep our eyes and ears open on the ground.
Yeah, and you mentioned that President Sassou Nguesso has been in power for a long time. It's been an uninterrupted 39 years in power. David, let's come to you and spread the conversation widely. We are reporting this morning that there seems to be some kind of security pact between Niger, Burkina Faso, including Mali. These countries that have now undergone a coup, they are clubbing together to say, whoever amongst us is attacked, we are going to pledge solidarity and will come to your defense. What does that tell us about the prevalence of these coups, and what is the end game, perhaps?
Well, I think it sends a very disturbing message, especially for pro-democrats. I'm talking about people that believe military coup d'etats is something of the past. What we see on board, as you rightly said, is an architecture which has been set up, called the Liptako-Goma Alliance, set up by the three states of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Remember, all these three countries are part of the ECOWAS, but of course they've been suspended by both the ECOWAS and the African Union for reasons being that they are now ruled by military juntas who are beneficiaries of the coup. Article 1 of that Liptako-Goma Alliance establishes a security architecture which talks about collective defense, mutual assistance, and of course safeguarding the territorial integrity against any internal or external aggression. So that would simply be in reference to perhaps the planned military intervention by ECOWAS or maybe any French ideas, to kind of storm Niger and reinstate President Bazoum. But more importantly, Article 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 are quite important because it talks about the fact that these countries, being Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, experiencing a high level of jihadist activities, explicitly said on Article 4 that, they will form a counterinsurgency collaboration, which effectively means the G5 Sahel, which was initiated by the French, is now dead in the waters. That would also have a serious impact on the multinational joint task force, to which Niger was a member of that. So they've established that mutual agreement. They've talked about an alliance to prevent any aggression, as I mentioned earlier on. But Article 6 is more important because it reminds me of the NATO Article 5, which says all for one, one for all. An attack on one nation is effectively an attack on all nations, effectively meaning that ECOWAS will now have to review any plans to carry out a military intervention in Niger, because now we're talking about three states combining their military force to defend in the event that ECOWAS carries out any military intervention. So it's quite important. But Article 10 of that talks about how it's going to be financed by all member states. But very worryingly, Article 11, as you rightly mentioned, said any other member state that is interested in the ideology or the alliance is open to join. And this is where countries that may be experiencing some sort of a coup scare, these military men could benefit from this alliance. Tough times to come ahead.
Gentlemen, I'd like to ask for your indulgence. I need to take a break. Koffi, can I ask you to think about this particular question as we come after the break? The pro-democrats, as David has alluded, who may frown upon these coups, but I suppose the question is, what happens in countries where there clearly is no democracy? We're talking about long-time leaders here. That conversation continues after the break. You're watching Newsfeed AM. If you're just joining us, you find us in the middle of a conversation with David Otto. He is the director for the Geneva Centre for Africa Security and Strategic Studies. Alongside him is Africa analyst Koffi Kouakou. Koffi, let me come to you. That question I posed before we went on the break. Those who support democracy, David says they are going to frown upon these coups that are taking place. But what is it that they actually should frown upon? Because you have long-time leaders who clearly have no interest of relinquishing power. And if that power is relinquished, we have seen in most instances where the country becomes some kind of a dynasty for a particular family. So what should worry pro-democrats more? Is it dictatorships or genuine democracies?
Well, if you want, to the dismay and anger of the purist Democrats or people who find democracy in its pure forms as very important for Africa, they're going to have to be a bit more realistic. So there's a certain realism that must be inserted into what's happening now in Africa, given all these coups that are taking place. Sick and dysfunctional democracies are not what we need in Africa. Being in power and staying there, renewing, having a second mandate or term, and then even fiddle with the Constitution and extend the state to become democratic or being elected by fraudulent elections is not going to work anymore. In fact, most Africans, as we said in South Africa, are hurtful. They have enough of these kind of sick and dysfunctional democracies. So what's happening is really the symptom that most of our democracies are dysfunctional. Even in South Africa, I hate to say that, the democracies and the leaders who are running them are not really meeting the needs of African, the basic needs of Maslow hierarchy of needs: security, food, deal with extreme poverty, inequalities, and unemployment. Youth across Africa are just they're really disappointed about the kind of democracy we've inherited. So these will continue. It's just the beginning of them. And we'll find them in places like, of course, Gabon's already happened, Congo-Brazzaville, and perhaps we might move to Cote d'Ivoire. And there were rumors about Senegal. We can be proud of most of these democracies, but they haven't been delivering. And they haven't transformed necessarily the lives of the people they've been governing. So there is something that's making people uncomfortable. And most citizens don't have the power to change things with legal systems that take months and years to take place. And it seems that two things are taking place: street protests, but at the same time, the military that are taking advantage of these street protests and the anger of Africans. And I think that is going to be something we'll see more and more. We want a form of democracy. A good colleague of mine used to say, we want democracy with African characteristics, which means democracies that are meeting the goals and the needs of the basic Maslow hierarchy of needs of African population. And we're hoping we'll get that, but it's going to take a bit of time.
So as we round up this conversation, particularly in countries that are affected by coups, David, so in West Africa, you have the ECOWAS group. There is now this coming together of the countries that have been affected by coups, that are forming some kind of security pact. How does the ECOWAS respond to this? And is it, by the way, the problem of the West African states to deal with? Where's the AU in all of this? Because that's the umbrella body of the African states.
Yes, and Corley, I think what normally happens is that the AU kind of designates and expects that the eight regional bodies that are spread across the continent will deal directly with issues within their regions. And that's why they were created. So the likes of ECOWAS will be given priority over issues that are raised or issues that are, concern its member states. The AU sits and then perhaps, supports these architectures to carry out either be it economic or political changes or issues within their country state. So the African Union kind of is like the overseer of issues within the continent. But of course, I think it should take a much more proactive step, when it comes to some of these issues. Remember that what we're experiencing in the continent is having a direct negative image on the kind of the ability of the African Union to, control what happens within its continent of 54, 55 member states, depending on where you stand at. At this point in time, I do agree with my colleague that what we're experiencing is that revolutions and military coup d'etats, they thrive in an environment where there's injustice. And as he rightly said, I think the African Union, together with its regional bodies, must look into the core reasons why we're having military coup d'etats. And my colleague has mentioned that you cannot continue to promote a system of democracy when that system itself, is running on very low moral grounds. We're talking about a system that has been abused. We're talking about the lack of independence of the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive branch. About the absence of some kind of credible systems of elections. So this is where I think the AU should come in and must come in to ensure that if we pro-democrats, or if we want to continue to promote a democratic system of governance, then that system should be one that provides a government for the people, by the people, and to the people. As a matter of fact, not a government that provides for a few. And this is where I think the biggest advantage, I have to add, in terms of military coups comes from. When they do get the support of the people, then of course there is no other thing that anyone can do. Yeah. And that's why the African Union is struggling in this particular part of the country, be it West and Central Africa, to cope and stop the bleeding of military coups as we see them.
Gentlemen, there's so much to talk about here, because even these regional and continental bodies, whether you talk ECOWAS or African Union, how effective have they been? That's a different conversation for another day. Let me thank both of you. I'm out of time, unfortunately. David Otto and Koffi Kouakou giving us an analysis of what is going on the continent of Africa, and whether or not democracies, even those that are seen as stable, like ours here, but they're not serving the interests of the people. People don't feel that democracy is best serving them. So what happens? It's a conversation worth having moving ahead.